400 people watched my wife smash our anniversary cake into my face. The frosting dripped down my suit as guests laughed and pulled out their phones. Her boyfriend stood 3 feet away, smiling. Then she dropped divorce papers on the table and said, "I'm done pretending." The room waited for me to break. I just wiped my face slowly and looked at her. They had no idea what I had already prepared. But to understand that, I have to start from the beginning because this story is about much more than revenge. If you love stories where the man they discarded becomes the one they beg, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Because this revenge, it's cold, calculated, and completely unforgettable. Now let's go back to the night they made the biggest mistake of their lives. My name is Sebastian Hale, and I survived hunger, buried my siblings, buried my mother, built an empire from scratch. But none of that broke me the way love did. Because the hardest thing I have ever done in my life was loving the wrong woman and convincing myself, every single morning, that she would change. I grew up in a place where poverty wasn't a circumstance, but was the air you breathed. My father died when I was 7, leaving my mother with 3 kids. My mother worked multiple jobs to put food on the table, and I watched her stretch a single pot of rice across 2 days. My sister got sick one winter and died because we couldn't pay hospital bills. My brother died the following year from malnutrition and a respiratory infection. My mother died the following year because losing 3 people she loved in 5 years took a toll on her. I stood beside my mother's graveside after her burial and made a promise that I will never be powerless again. And I will build a family that never knows what this feels like. I didn't have a single eureka moment or a mentor who spotted my potential, but I had a library card and a stubbornness that probably looked like stupidity from the outside. I taught myself to code using library computers and textbooks I couldn't always return on time because I was halfway through them when the due date hit. I studied systems, infrastructure, logistics technology, anything where I could see a real-world problem that nobody had solved cleanly. At 22, I created a route optimization algorithm for logistics companies, the kind of thing that sounds boring until you understand that shaving 12 minutes off 1,000 daily delivery routes across a mid-sized company saves millions of dollars a year. I sold the patent for $1 million. I hired excellent lawyers and accountants and let them be the face of everything while I stayed behind the structure, building. By 26, I was worth $40 million. By 28, I'd crossed $100 million. By 30, the company was valued at just over $1 billion, and I still lived in a modest apartment in a quiet part of the city and drove a car that nobody looked at twice. I met Ivana at a nonprofit fundraiser I quietly supported after being asked to attend in person to see the impact of my funding. She had this presence that I didn't have a word for at the time. She moved through that room like she had already decided she owned it and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. She was laughing at something, head tilted back, completely unself-conscious, and something about that freedom hit me in a place I hadn't known was still open. I grew up guarded, careful, watching. She was none of those things, and I was fascinated in the way that someone who has spent their whole life in a small, dark room is fascinated by sunlight. I knew the light could blind, but I walked toward it anyway. We talked for 2 hours that night. She was sharp, funny, curious in a way that felt genuine. She asked questions and actually listened to the answers. When she found out I worked in tech, she asked what I built, and I told her simply that I had a company. She raised an eyebrow and asked what kind. I said logistics infrastructure. She laughed, not cruelly, just lightly, and said that sounded spectacularly boring. I didn't correct her. I didn't tell her what it was actually worth. I just smiled and said it paid the bills. She thought I was a mid-level tech worker with moderate ambitions and a quiet life. And something in me decided to let her think that. Not as a test, at least not consciously. I think I just wanted, for once, to be wanted for something that wasn't about what I had. 6 weeks after we started dating, I met Ivana's parents at their family house. Her father, Charles, greeted me warmly, while Ivana's mother, Margaret, looked at me the way a property inspector looks at a crack in a foundation. Over lunch, she asked where I grew up. I told her. She nodded slowly, the way people nod when they've confirmed something they already suspected. She asked where I went to university. I named the state school I'd attended for 2 years before dropping out to build the company. Another slow nod. A man's background tells you everything about his ceiling, she said, not to me, but to the table in general, as if she were sharing a piece of wisdom she'd long since filed under obvious. Ivana laughed. Not nervously, not apologetically. Just laughed, the way you laugh at a family joke you've heard 100 times. I proposed to Ivana 8 months later. The first year of marriage, I told myself the coldness was an adjustment, that Ivana was ambitious and driven, and those qualities sometimes came with edges. I cooked dinner most nights because she worked late, or said she did. I handled the household details, the maintenance, the bills because I was organized and because it felt like contribution. I told myself that building a home together took time. That softness came with safety, and safety had to be earned through consistency. Her mother came to dinner once a month in our house. Every single time, without exception, she found something to dismantle. My food was too simple. My conversation was too quiet. My suit at their company event wasn't the right kind of formal. She once told a table full of Ivana's colleagues that Sebastian came from very humble beginnings, which in her mouth was not a compliment, but a diagnosis. Ivana never corrected her. Not once. By the 3rd year, Ivana had stopped pretending that the gap she felt between us was something she was working to close. She stopped asking about my work. She stopped eating dinner with me most nights. She made plans without mentioning them to me and came home when she came home, and when I asked how her day was, she answered in the tone people use for checkout clerks. Technically polite. Completely absent. I cooked. I supported. I stayed. Not because I was weak. Because I still believed that somewhere inside the woman I'd married was the person I'd met at that fundraiser. The one who laughed without self-consciousness and asked questions and listened to the answers. I believed that people were capable of returning to their best selves if you held the space long enough. Margaret's cruelty sharpened as the years went on. She began inviting her friends to gatherings specifically, I realized later, so she had an audience for it. At a dinner party in our 4th year, she raised her glass and said Ivana had tried her best with what she called substandard material, nodding toward me like I was something defective. The table laughed. Ivana smiled. I kept cutting my food like I hadn't just been reduced to a joke. Charles watched everything. Once, after a particularly sharp evening, he caught me alone in the hallway and put his hand briefly on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He just nodded and walked away. It was a Tuesday night in October when everything I had chosen to believe was taken from me. I had come home early. My last meeting had ended ahead of schedule, and I let myself into the house quietly because Ivana had mentioned she was on a call she didn't want interrupted. I went to the kitchen for water, and that's when I heard her. She was in the sitting room. The door was half open. She was laughing the way she used to laugh with me, completely unguarded, and at first, just for a fraction of a second, I felt something hopeful stir in my chest. Then I heard what she was saying. I told you I got rid of the pregnancy months ago. That night with him didn't mean anything. It was just a stupid mistake after a few drinks. I don't like him. I love you, and I wasn't going to let something like that ruin what we have. I stood in the hallway and didn't move. It felt like the ground beneath me shifted, like something holding my life together had suddenly broken. He doesn't understand anything, and he never has. That's the problem. He just accepts everything without questioning it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. After the party, it's over. Then she laughed. Damien, stop. I can't do this at the anniversary and still keep a straight face. More laughter. I told you, after that night I'm done. We can finally just be done with all of it. I didn't walk in. I stood there and listened. Every word she said peeled something off me, layer by layer, until there was nothing left to protect. Then I walked back out the front door the same way I'd come in. Quietly. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't feel what I expected to feel, which was rage. I felt something much colder and much more permanent than rage. I felt the specific grief of a man who had finally been shown the thing he had been refusing to see. She hadn't just been cheating on me, but she was pregnant with my baby. And she had ended the pregnancy, without telling me, without asking me. without pausing for even a moment to consider that the child she was making a decision about was also mine. I had wanted children my entire adult life. I had wanted a family since I was a boy watching his siblings die one by one. I had wanted children to give everything I never had. That child, my child, had existed and been removed from the world, and I hadn't even known. I sat in that car and felt the last piece of the dream I had carried since my mother's graveside disappeared. And then I made a decision. I was not going to confront her. I was not going to give her the scene she had probably half prepared for, the tearful accusation that she could bat away, dismiss, turn into evidence of my instability. I was going to let her finish exactly what she had planned. I knew I had to find proof if I wanted to get revenge, if I wanted her to pay for what she did. So I contacted my head of legal the next morning. First, I asked for full financial audit of every account Ivana had access to, including the ones tied to her father's business interests. Second, I needed everything documented, time-stamped, and held in legal custody. I hired a private investigator to look into Damien, his financial history, his professional history, and any connections to Ivana's business activities that cross legal lines. What came back over the following weeks was thorough and deeply unsurprising. Ivana had been moving money steadily. Transfers routed through a holding account in her name, drawing from business funds she technically had signatory access to but had no authorization to redirect for personal use. Damien had received payments from that same account. Consulting fees, the invoices said, for work that, as far as my legal team could determine, had never been performed. Fraud. Clean, documentable, with a paper trail that my forensic accountant described as remarkably consistent. I documented everything. Screenshots, recordings, witnesses. Ivana planned our 5th-year anniversary without telling me and sent invitations to 400 guests. Ivana's choice of venue, Ivana's guest list, Ivana's vision of the evening, down to the floral arrangements and the string quartet and the 5-tier cake she had personally designed with the patisserie. I ignored how she had dismissed me and confirmed my attendance. And continue my own preparations. Ivana planned a photo display for the evening. Every major event space has display screens, for slideshows, for photo montages of the happy couple. I arranged for the system to have a secondary input, accessible from a device in my pocket, that would override whatever she had programmed. On the morning of the anniversary, I dressed in a dark suit, drove to the Harrington Grand, and walked into the ballroom as Sebastian Hale, Ivana's quiet, unremarkable, easily dismissed husband. She had outdone herself. The room was genuinely beautiful. I'll give her that. Crystal chandeliers, ivory linens, the string quartet she'd insisted on, champagne moving through the crowd on silver trays. 400 people who represented every layer of the social world she had spent her life climbing toward, all of them gathered to celebrate a marriage that ended months ago. Ivana stood at the center of it all in a gown that had been made for her specifically, emerald green, fitted, the kind of dress that announces its own expense. She was radiant in the way people are radiant when they feel completely in control of everything around them. She moved between guests with the ease of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this night. Damien arrived 40 minutes in, and Ivana's eyes found him immediately from across the room. I watched that happen. I watched the small, private smile she gave him, the one she stopped giving me months ago. I stood near the bar with a glass of water and watched all of it without expression. The speeches began just before 9. Margaret spoke first. Margaret in a champagne-colored dress, pearls at her throat, her voice carrying the particular authority of a woman who has never once doubted her own right to speak. She toasted to Ivana's grace, her ambition, her impeccable taste. She paused at the right moments for the right kind of laughter. She didn't mention my name. I was the useless son-in-law she never liked. Then Ivana took the microphone. She thanked her guests, her family. She spoke about the 5 years of marriage with just enough warmth to be believable to people who hadn't lived inside it. She paused in the right places. She laughed at the right moments. Then she looked at me, and something shifted in her eyes. "There's a thing I've learned," she said, "about the men women choose when they're young and still believe in potential." Light laughter from certain tables. "Some men surprise you. And some men confirm exactly what they always were. More laughter. More comfortable than it should have been. I saw Margaret smile into her champagne glass. I stood there and let it happen. Then Ivana stepped down from the small platform, walked directly to the cake table, picked up the bottom tier with both hands, and pressed it into my face. Frosting. Cold, thick, white. It covered my eyes, my jaw, my entire face. I heard the room. That particular sharp intake of collective breath, and then, from somewhere near the back, a laugh that broke the silence and gave everyone else permission. Phones came up. I could see the flash of screens through the frosting still heavy on my eyelids. Damien stepped forward. Easy, unhurried. He put his hand on the small of Ivana's back. She reached into the silk clutch on the table beside her and produced an envelope. She set it on the table in front of me. I'm done with you, Sebastian. I'm done pretending. Sign the papers and get out of my life. The room waited. I reached up and wiped the frosting from my face. Slowly. Completely unhurried. I cleaned my eyes first, then my jaw, then I straightened my jacket. I picked up the envelope, looked at it once, and set it back down on the table. Then I looked at Ivana, then at Damien, then at the 400 people holding their phones and their champagne glasses and waiting for me to break. You've been planning this for a long time. My voice was quiet, but it was the only sound in the room. Ivana's smile didn't waver. Since I got tired of pretending you were enough, you're the greatest mistake of my life. I nodded slowly. Good, I said. So have I. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my phone. The screens came on. All of them simultaneously. The large display panels Ivana had arranged throughout the ballroom for the photo montage of our marriage. They all switched at once, and the image that appeared was not a wedding photo. It was a photograph of Ivana and Damien at a restaurant. A private one, taken from outside, through the window. Laughing. Hands touching across the table. Time-stamped 14 months ago. Ivana's face changed immediately. What are you doing? She snapped. Showing everyone exactly who my wife is. And revealing everything she did during our marriage. Her eyes drained of colors. Margaret's voice rang out immediately. Security. Remove this man from here. Margaret. I said her name the way you say the name of something small and insignificant you've just noticed on the floor. Before you call security, you might want to ask yourself how much these people in this room know about the money you moved from Charles's personal account and the additional funds you redirected from the company's operating account into a private account that Charles has never once had access to. I let that land. You've spent 5 years telling everyone in this room that I came from nothing. But you've been stealing from your own husband and his company for years, and you did it so carefully you thought no one would ever look. I smiled. You just never expected the man you called nothing to be the one looking. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. The command she had just issued to security died somewhere between her throat and the air. Her hand, still raised and pointing, lowered itself slowly, the way something lowers when the person attached to it has suddenly forgotten what they were doing. The room reacted the way rooms do when something shifts from entertainment to reality. The laughter was gone. The comfortable murmuring was gone. People were looking at Margaret now with a different kind of attention, not the polite, admiring attention she had commanded for years, but the still, careful attention of people recalculating everything they thought they knew. I saw 2 of Charles's board members exchange a look across their table. I saw phones that had been raised to film me now pointed in a different direction entirely. Charles sat very still at his table. He was looking at his wife with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not shock, but the particular stillness of a man hearing confirmation of something he had suspected for a long time and had never allowed himself to fully believe. I turned back to Ivana. She was still standing where she had been, but something had shifted in her posture. Her eyes moved between me and her mother and back again, and for the first time since I had known her, Ivana did not look like a woman who knew exactly what came next. You married me because you thought I was safe, small enough to manage, quiet enough to dismiss. You spent 5 years treating me like a footnote in your own story. I paused. But here is what I need you to understand, Ivana. You didn't just betray a husband. You made a decision about a child that was not yours alone to make. You ended something that I would have given everything to protect, and you did it without a single conversation, without a moment's hesitation, because that child would have complicated what you were building with someone else. The room was completely silent. I forgave you for a lot of things inside this marriage. I forgave the coldness. I forgave the cruelty. I forgave 5 years of being invisible in my own home. My voice didn't rise. It never rose. But I will not forgive that. And you will not walk away from this marriage having paid nothing for it.
Now,
let me show everyone in this room exactly who both of you really are. The audio played. Her own voice, crisp and clear, from that Tuesday night in October. I told you I got rid of the pregnancy months ago. That night with him didn't mean anything. It was just a stupid mistake after a few drinks. I don't like him. I love you, and I wasn't going to let something like that ruin what we have. Not a single person in that ballroom moved. I watched Ivana's face in real time as the color left it. I watched Damien's jaw tighten. I watched Margaret's champagne glass lower very slowly from her lips. The next image shows a financial document. Account numbers. Transfer amounts.
dates.
The routing of funds from a business account in Ivana's name to a personal account belonging to Damien Marsh displayed clearly in the document header. The next document was a full forensic accounting summary, prepared by a firm whose letterhead several people in that room would recognize.
Fraud. Wire transfers.
False invoices bearing Damien's consulting company name. Then the last slide. Hale Meridian Group. Privately held. Global Logistics Technology Infrastructure. Assets under management. Clearly listed. Valuation. Clearly listed. And at the bottom, one line was my name. Founder and principal, Sebastian A. Hale. I heard someone near the front say the number out loud, quietly, as if reading it to themselves to confirm it was real. I put my phone back in my pocket. My company saved your father's business 3 years ago, when it almost collapsed. Ivana blinked.
Confused.
The proposal you've spent 3 months preparing, the deal you said would change your career, the company you've been chasing? I paused, letting it sink in. That's mine, Ivana. Hale Meridian Group. You've been trying to get a meeting with your own husband, and you didn't even know it. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from everything that had come before it. This was the silence of a room watching a woman's entire understanding of her own life rearrange itself in real time. Ivana's lips parted. Nothing came out. The apartment we lived in when we got married, mine. The car you drive, purchased through one of my holding accounts. The shares in your father's company that you list among your personal assets and have been leveraging for your own career, they exist because I quietly funded the investment that stopped your family from losing everything. I tilted my head slightly. You built your confidence on a foundation I poured. You looked down at me from a height I built for you. And you never once looked down to see whose hands were holding it up. Her hand went to her mouth. Not dramatically. Involuntarily. The way a hand moves when the body understands something before the mind is ready to accept it. Every room you walked into with your head high, every deal you closed, every introduction your father's company name opened for you, all of it was possible because of the man you smashed a cake into tonight. I let that sit. I was never the footnote in your story, Ivana. You were living inside mine. I turned slightly toward Charles. Charles. My voice shifted, not harder, just direct. I want Ivana and Margaret removed from any role, position, or access they currently hold in your company. Effective immediately. Not tomorrow. Tonight. I held his gaze. If that doesn't happen, Hale Meridian withdraws its investment and its support from Voss Holdings entirely. Every structure, every fund, every arrangement we have dissolved. Your company will not survive that a second time, and we both know it. This is absurd. Margaret's voice cut through the silence. You can't just... Margaret. Charles stood from his seat at the head and looked at his wife. Enough. Then he looked at his daughter. The look lasted a long time. He looked at me. He nodded once. Slowly. Completely. Done, he said. One word.
No hesitation.
Margaret made a sound. Something between a protest and a gasp. Charles looked at her, and whatever she saw in his face, made the sound stop. I took out an envelope from inside the pocket of my jacket. I walked to Ivana and placed it in her hand. She took it without thinking, the way people take things when they are too stunned to decide whether they want them. "Those are my divorce papers," I said. "Not yours."
Mine.
Prepared by my legal team with conditions that reflect everything I have documented over the past 6 months. I straightened my jacket. I looked at Ivana one final time. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with a clear, steady look of a man who has finished something he should have finished a long time ago. "My lawyers will be in touch with all of you by Monday morning." Then I turned and walked through 400 people who parted without being asked, across the ballroom floor, past the string quartet that hadn't played a note in 20 minutes, through the doors of the Harrington Grand, and out into the night air. I didn't look back. There was nothing left behind me worth looking back for. The next weeks were not clean or simple, because consequences rarely are. Ivana's lawyers were excellent, and they worked hard, and they made exactly zero meaningful progress because every asset they attempted to reach had already been properly insulated before the party. The fraud proceedings moved forward because documentary evidence at that level of clarity doesn't leave much room for creative interpretation. Damien's legal situation moved faster than Ivana's because he had been less careful and his paper trail was more direct. His company was dissolved. His professional licenses were suspended pending investigation. He accepted a plea arrangement 6 months later that included community service and financial restitution, which he could barely afford because it turned out that without Ivana's redirected funds, he had very little of his own. Ivana faced the harder reckoning. The fraud charges were serious. Her reputation in the professional circles she'd spent her life cultivating collapsed quickly and completely. That specific social world runs on trust and financial credibility, and she had damaged both beyond repair in a single evening that 400 people had witnessed, and a significant portion had filmed. Margaret lost her platform. The women who had laughed along with her for years quietly redistributed themselves to other tables, because that is what that world does with people once they are no longer useful. She came to see me once, about 2 months after the party. I agreed to the meeting, because I was curious what she would say. She sat across from me in the small office I kept at the Meridian headquarters and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "I genuinely believed you were nothing."
I know,
I said.
I was wrong, she said. The words seemed to cost her something.
"Yes," I said. "You were." She left. I didn't see her again. Charles and I had several conversations over the following year. He had known the shape of what I was from early on, had quietly tracked Hale Meridian through public business filings and connections he never disclosed to his family. He had chosen silence for reasons I came to understand were complicated. A lifetime of choosing his battles inside a marriage to Margaret, a hope that Ivana might develop into someone different, a father's reluctance to see his daughter clearly. None of those reasons were sufficient, and I think he knew that. But the hand he extended to me in the ballroom was genuine, and I chose to accept it for what it was. I want to tell you that the night the screens came on and the room went silent, and Ivana finally saw me clearly, I felt something triumphant. I want to tell you that it healed what had been broken, but it didn't. The thing about building a strategy out of grief is that the strategy works and the grief remains. I had been methodical and thorough and completely correct in everything I had planned. I had won, by every measurable definition of the word. And I drove home from the Harrington Grand that night and sat in my apartment in the quiet and felt the full weight of everything I had not been able to expose or reverse or fix. My mother, who worked herself to death wanting something better for me. My siblings who never had the chance to grow up. My child, who had existed for a few months and then hadn't, and whom I had never known about until I was standing in a hallway with a glass of water in my hand. I thought about the specific thing I had wanted, not the company, not the success, not the validation. A table with people at it. A house that had noise in it. A child who could ask me questions I didn't have answers to, and trust that I would find them. I had built a billion-dollar company, and I had never, not once, had that. Revenge doesn't fill the space that the original thing was supposed to occupy. I understood that clearly, sitting alone in my apartment the night of the anniversary party, and I understood it more clearly as the months passed. I was grateful I had protected myself. I was not healed. I sold the apartment that spring. Not because I needed to, because I needed to be somewhere else. I bought a smaller place outside the city, nearer to water, the kind of place where the mornings are quiet in a way that actually feels like peace rather than absence. Ivana wrote me a letter from prison. 3 pages, handwritten. I read it once. She apologized for the cruelty, for the fraud, for Damien, for the 5 years of coldness. But the paragraph that stopped me was the one about the child. She wrote, I told myself it was a decision. I understand now that it was a theft. I took something from you that you had been waiting your whole life for, and I treated it like an inconvenience. There is no version of sorry that is big enough for that. But I am sorry. I folded the letter carefully and put it away. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw it away either. Some things deserve to be kept, even when they hurt, maybe especially then. I started a foundation. I named it after my mother. It funds health clinics in underserved communities, the kind of clinic that might have saved my siblings. I think about my siblings sometimes, the way you think about the people you couldn't save when you were still learning how to save yourself. I think about what they might have become. I let myself think about it rather than closing the door on it, because I've learned that what you close the door on has a way of pressing against it from the other side until something breaks. I think about the child I never met. I don't have a name for the grief of that. I have sat with it long enough to know it will not go away, and I have stopped expecting it to. I am not the boy who stood in an empty kitchen watching his siblings go hungry. I know that. That boy survived things that should have ended him, and what came after that survival was real and earned in mine. But I am also not the man who walked into the Harrington Grand on his 5th anniversary full of hope that the evening would somehow be different from the 5 years that had preceded it. That man is gone too, and I don't miss him the way you'd expect. He wanted things so much that he couldn't see what was actually in front of him. That kind of wanting is its own kind of blindness. I am something in between those two people, or something that came after both of them. A man who survived his childhood and survived his marriage and built something real out of the wreckage of both, and who sits sometimes near the water in the early morning and thinks about what it would mean to try again. Not to replace what was lost, because you can't replace it, but to build something new with the knowledge of everything the first version cost. I haven't answered that question yet, but I am, for the first time in my life, asking it from a place of stillness rather than hunger. And that is something my mother would have wanted for me. That is something the boy I was could not have imagined. I built a life to protect a family. I just chose the wrong one. The next choice will be made more carefully. And this time, I will know what I'm looking at before I walk toward the light. Sometimes, the greatest betrayal isn't the humiliation or the lies. It's the quiet decisions made behind your back that steal the future you were building. Sebastian's story shows that love without respect will always turn into suffering, no matter how much you give, how patient you are, or how deeply you believe someone will change. Revenge may expose the truth and restore your dignity, but it doesn't heal the wounds that betrayal leaves behind. True strength is not just in rising after being broken, it's in choosing better, seeing clearly, and never abandoning your own worth again. And most importantly, never build your life around someone who cannot see your value. Build it with someone who does. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me what you learned. Because stories like this, they're not just about revenge. They're about survival, growth, and choosing yourself when it matters most. And trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next.